She walked as he walked towards the cross of Calvary. She watched as he was mocked and ridiculed and as he was pulled down. She watched what was going on. She heard the crowd yelling, "Crucify him, crucify him." She saw the soldiers with their whips as they lashed his body. She saw them as they disfigured this man she loved, her friend. She watched everything. She watched everything. She saw everything. She saw it when he was on the cross of Calvary and when he was pierced for our sin and iniquity. She saw everything. So she walks to the tomb early the next morning. Well, there's still not enough sunlight, and she gets there ready to do what she needs to do. She sees the tomb open. But she's not confident or courageous enough to walk in. She runs back and she calls Peter. And we believe it's John, the disciple Jesus loved. John's faster than Peter, so he gets there quickly. He gets there real quickly. But he doesn't walk all the way in too, and Peter does. He walks straight in. You know, it's typical Peter, right? He walks out of the boat right onto the water. He doesn't need, he's rash. He's audacious. He walks out. He goes in and he looks. But here's the interesting nuances of this passage of Scripture. Peter and John, they return back to where they're staying. And in some other translations, we hear that they're staying in the house and they've locked the doors. They've gone back. They didn't linger too long. It's dangerous to be around at this time. They go back. But Mary stays. Mary doesn't go back. She doesn't run away. She stays right there. A little bit braver. She walks in and she sees two angels, one at the foot and one at the head. And Mary's weeping. She's crying. Where is my master? I want to spend the last few more moments with him. I want to be with him. And the angels say to her, "Woman, why are you crying?" She says, "Tell me where you've taken him, and I'll find him." And while she's weeping and while she's crying, she can hear behind her. There's a rustle. There's things happening around her. She can hear there's things that are changing around her. And she turns and she thinks this must be the gardener. And her eyes are blurry and the sun is still down. And she looks and she sees. And she says to what she thinks is the gardener, "Where have you taken him?" Says to a woman, "Why are you crying the second time?" And she keeps on debating with him until he says to her, "Mary." See, this is where the gospel moves from just being powerful to being personal. See, the gospel is personal. It's not just powerful, it's personal. He knows her name, and when he speaks her name, and when he calls her, she responds, "Rabbi, Rabbina, teacher." She recognizes the sweet way in which he speaks to her and which he engages with. He calls her by name, and when he calls her name, she goes, "My teacher lives. He's not dead, he's alive." See, this is where the gospel becomes personal, friends. The gospel is not just some story that is spoken or preached or communicated or where people gather to unpack through scripture. The gospel's personal because Jesus knows your name. And he calls you by name, and he seeks you by name, and he says, you are mine, you are my child, come to me. And the grief that Mary carries, the fear that she holds on to, moves away. He turns your fear into triumph. He turns your mourning into dancing, and he turns your judgment into grace. He says to you by name, I'm calling you home. And when Mary hears his name, all the sorrow, the pain, the anguish that she has burdened on her is shifted and moved.